No two human beings are alike. So even if you fall into a category that's post-traumatic stress disorder, my number one thing is that when you position yourself for healing, is just to not consider that a label that you're going to carry for the rest of your life.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Anna Cabeca. I'm here with a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Srini Pillary. And Dr. Srini Pillary, it's so great to have you here today. Thank you for being with me on this really tough topic. We're going to be discussing PTSD and the effects of trauma, the effects of anxiety, and how that affects our outward look, our ability to connect in this world, our ability to respond in this world. And so it's great to have you here today, Dr. Pillary.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Anna. And also, I think to really talk to you, because one of the major reasons I really love talking to you is that I know that you're a needle shifter and you don't want things to be the same all the time. And so it's fantastic to be in conversation with you, and hopefully people will get a lot out of this.
Oh, they definitely will, as will I, as always, because you never know where our conversations go. I love that too. So tell our audience about your amazing background. Dr. Srini Pillary is a world-renowned Harvard psychiatrist, a brain expert, and he is the award-winning author of the motivational book of the year called Life Unlocked: 7 Revolutionary Lessons to Overcome Fear. He is the former director of the Anxiety Disorders Services at Harvard's McLean Hospital, consistently voted one of the top 5 hospitals in the United States. He graduated as the overall top medical student, won more awards during his residency at Harvard than any other resident, and is regarded as a pioneer in the field of applied brain science for corporations, self-help, schools, food, fashion, and the arts. Srini is also the CEO of Neuro Business Group, voted one of the top 20 movers and shakers in leadership development in the world, and is noted for his uncanny ability to translate complex brain science into usable tips. He's widely sought out by the media and has been featured on the Dr. Laura Berman Show on Oprah Radio, Martha Stewart, Whole Living, Elle, Cosmopolitan, Fox News, The New York Times, and numerous other media outlets. Srini has also recently spoken to the Professional Businesswomen of California with high acclaim. His aim is to help people understand how we can all unleash the power of our brains to live happier and more productive lives. And, you know, with Srini too, I mean, we've talked before about food and medicine, and just our earlier conversation about the music and health and how that affects our brain and our cognition. Very impressive. Again, great to have you here.
It's really lovely to be here.
Well, let's go on and let's talk about PTSD and explain how people get classified with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Sure. So when people talk about post-traumatic stress disorder in a formal context, really what they're talking about is a diagnosis that comes from a book that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, now currently in version 5, which essentially has a set of criteria that relate to the fact that there has been a significant enough trauma, that there's been persistent symptoms over a period of time, and that those persistent symptoms include things like re-experiencing the trauma, being provoked by stimuli that remind you of the trauma, and having several other symptoms like insomnia, anger, flashbacks, and a host of other things. The reason I'm being that general about it is, I guess the first thing I want to say is when I see anyone in my practice, and I do a diagnostic evaluation, the first thing that I do is I do a fairly robotic examination while I'm understanding the complexity of who's responding. And the first piece of feedback is, I usually say, I'm going to tell you 2 things. I'm going to give you formal feedback, and then I'm going to tell you what I really think. And then the formal feedback is, you meet criteria for PTSD or you don't, and this is why this matters. And then usually what I really think is that the first thing is no two human beings are alike. So even if you fall into a category that's post-traumatic stress disorder, my number one thing is that when you position yourself for healing, is just to not consider that a label that you're going to carry for the rest of your life. That really, what's important is to recognize it. I'm not suggesting deny it, to know it, but to recognize that this experience is a pretty individual experience, and that the more you can recognize how this applies to you and the more you can get involved in your own well-being and healing, the better it will be for you. Because the truth about psychiatric diagnoses, which I think is sort of, it's fascinating on so many levels, we have a lot of studies about reliability. Like, I can make a diagnosis of PTSD, you can make a diagnosis of PTSD, and we'll be pretty close. But we have no studies on validity. We have no tissue diagnoses. So, in gynecology, if you have a tumor, you can see the tissue under a microscope. In nephrology and kidney disease, you can look at the kidney under a microscope. In psychiatry, we have a lot of brain imaging studies. We have a lot of data that helps us understand how we can change our brains, but we really do not have a final tissue diagnosis. And so the paradox is, when you come to me and you have PTSD, the first thing I'm going to say is, please know this is your diagnosis, and then do not make it a centerpiece in your identity. You don't walk around saying, I am the flu, or, I am a heart attack, or I am kidney disease. And in the same way, you don't have to be what your psychiatric diagnosis is. I just see that as a general guideline to then help you to start thinking about how you can approach managing this really very real challenge in life, regardless of what the cause is.
I think that's a perfect statement, is that we are not our label, right? That can go to anything. We are a diabetic, and that's, this is just imbalance in hormones and increase in inflammation, and we've got to work on those things. Like, we keep going to the underlying root. And you know what, in my experience with PTSD and my own journey with it, including brain imaging studies, neuro evaluations unbelievable day-long neuro evaluations, et cetera, is recognizing, okay, these are symptoms of an underlying complex of things that are going on. And now, knowing that, now what are the first steps that you work with your client in approaching therapy from that?
So there are a couple of different things. In general, the model that I use is a biopsychosocial model. And it's an old model. And what it says is that there are biological underpinnings of what's going on. There are psychological underpinnings of what's going on. And there are social underpinnings of what's going on. Meaning, for example, if you've been traumatized and you have persistent anxiety, you may, for example, have a change in your brain chemistry. You may have a change in brain structures, like the amygdala, which is the brain's anxiety center, that may be overactivated. You may get a change in the size of your long-term memory center, like the hippocampus, which stores memories, and it's these very memories that come back to haunt you. So these are the kinds of biological things that happen, and there are biologic interventions that we can use to target those biological changes. But in addition to that, there are other ways of looking at what's going on, like psychologically. What are your psychological vulnerabilities? Do you have what we call anxiety sensitivity? Like, there are people in the world, two people can go through the same trauma. One person can develop PTSD and the other person cannot. And so there's an index called the Anxiety Sensitivity Index that tells you whether you actually have a greater sensitivity to anxiety, and you are actually vulnerable in that way, and that's why you develop those symptoms. But psychologically, this can also have to do with your current relationships, repeated traumas, the fact that separations are particularly difficult for you, that there are ways in which your identity and your ego structure has been affected, so that you have to learn to stand up for yourself more than other people do. So you can start to talk about it in that way. And then socially, I think PTSD has a lot to do with sort of whether or not you feel socially supported after the event and following the event. And a lot of times the trauma is so embarrassing for people, or they feel alienated from everyone else, that they don't actually even seek out the support that they could get. And so I think if we look at those three dimensions, the biological, the psychological, and the social, then we start to have a good idea of what could cause PTSD. And then we have a good idea of what investigations you need to do. And I usually will investigate in those three categories. and then I will treat in those 3 categories as well.
This episode of the show is sponsored by the Keto Green Shake Mix. The Keto Green Shake Mix is an all-in-one meal replacement shake that will help you with weight loss, give you more energy, help reduce hot flashes, and reduce your struggles with other hormone-related issues. It tastes great and will help you feel full longer. It is plant-based protein with 0 grams of sugar and all the vitamins and minerals you need. Find Keto Green Shake Mix at dranna.com and use the code SHOW10 to get 10% off your first order. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel here and get those notifications, and comment below. Let me know your thoughts, what you loved, and what your action step is.